Good afternoon. This is the Rules and Legislative Oversight Committee. We are holding a legislative oversight hearing on Safe Streets, and this is for the purpose of inviting the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement to brief the Council on the recent announced changes to the program, policies and procedures, and service delivery. We are joined, I'm Councilman Isaac Gitzi-Schleifer, Chair of the Committee, joined by Council Vice President Sharon Middleton, and Councilman Mark Conway, and other council members will be joining us shortly. This was sponsored by Chairman Conway, and I will give him an opportunity to provide a quick introduction. We are also joined by Councilwoman Ramos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, everybody. So, of course, this hearing is to talk about Safe Streets and particularly some of the major changes being made to Safe Streets in the broader scale of the CVI ecosystem. Already had an opportunity to talk with the Director Jackson, about some of the changes. And I think it's just important that the council be abreast of all the changes, why those changes are being made, what we can expect from them, and the broader vision for the program, knowing that it is certainly one of our marquee programs in reducing violence across the city. So with that, I look forward to jumping into the hearing. Thank you.
Thank you. And I see Director Jackson, you have a presentation, so if you guys can jump right in.
Oops. Okay.
Would you mind doing it from the podium, or do you want to do it specifically from your seat?
I would prefer to do it from my seat if that's all right.
Okay, sure, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson and members of the committee. For the public in general, I am Director Shante Jackson, Director of the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement. I am joined for today's hearing by members of the MONSE team and also by community-based partners and academic partners representing Associated Catholic Charities, Lifebridge Health, and Johns Hopkins Bloomberg. So before we jump in here, obviously looking forward to the opportunity to continue to demonstrate transparency as this agency always has under my directorship. Next slide, please. And so just to set the frame and some context for folks who are viewing this information for the first time, really important to note that the community violence intervention work that Safe Streets is sitting under is a part of two interconnected approaches that the mayor is taking through MONSE to address the disease of gun violence, the second of those being the group violence reduction strategy. Next slide. And so with regard to the group violence reduction strategy, this is a strategy that we're currently piloting in the Western District under the mayor's direction and at MONSE's direction, because we're driving the strategy on a day-to-day perspective around project management. We own the coordination of BPD, the state's attorney's office, service providers, community members, and other law enforcement personnel around this strategy. We've seen about a 30% reduction year-to-date in homicides and non-fatal shootings through this pilot. Next slide. On the community violence intervention front, this is the second component of this dual approach, and it is the component that does not involve a law enforcement engagement. Safe Streets is a part of the CVI work, as I mentioned before, and has been Baltimore's flagship intervention program since 2007, when it was incepted here in the city. Our increasing number of contracts that we have with community-based organizations is also a demonstration of our intention to continue to grow out this community-based ecosystem around community violence intervention and to scale it up across the city. And then just as a final note here, last year, because of the work that MONSE has been doing around developing this ecosystem, we were invited to participate in the White House Community Violence Intervention Civic, and I represent the administration for Mayor Scott in those engagements with the White House. Next slide. So again, just to set the frame and some more context, I think it makes a lot of sense to talk about what CVI looked like in the past. And by past, I mean before Mayor Scott took office. Specifically, we had 10 Safe Street sites after that 2018-2019 expansion, covering about 2.6 square miles of the city. We had some loose partnerships with our hospital systems, about 3 or 4 of them for a hospital violence intervention programming, and a contract with ROCA, which really focused on supporting our young folks through life coaching. Now, when we think about what it's truly going to take to employ community violence intervention through an interconnected ecosystem where the components are gears and turn into each other and provide interlocking supports to each other, this side of the slide demonstrates what that's going to take. It includes community outreach. It obviously includes Safe Streets and other violence intervention and mediation components. It means that we've got to go deeper in our relationships with our hospital-based partners, and in fact, we have. But it also means that we've got to bring in 2 new components of this work, specifically intensive life coaching, victim services that include wraparound supports. Next slide. So this map is a really interesting one. This is a map that we published back when we produced the CVI ecosystem report back in April of last year. The areas that you see with borders around them represent where Safe Streets posts are in the city. They correspond directly to police posts in our city. And as I mentioned before, they only cover about 2.6 square miles. Baltimore City is about 92 square miles, just for folks who don't know. Now, the placement corresponds directly to a BPD post that at the time of its placement had the most violent crime in our city. And so data-driven decisions were made to identify where each of these posts are. And the next slide will really drill into that for you. And so now you're looking at the previous slide with an overlay of the non-fatal and the fatal shootings in our city. This map also shows us where we have plenty of opportunities to expand. Next slide. On this slide, what you see are our 10 Safe Street sites, obviously with McKeldrey Park being the oldest site starting back in 2007, the lion's share, or 60% of the sites coming online back in 2019, and we've also shared who the current providers are here. Next slide. Intentionally highlighting these 4 sites because these are the 4 sites that we are working to transition now. These 4 sites are the sites that effective January 1 will transition to Associated Catholic Charities and to Lifebridge respectively. Next slide. So the numbers. So year to date through, just last Saturday, October 16th, these 10 sites have conducted over 1,700 mediations. And I think it's important to make this point here because we're still talking about just within 2.6 square miles of the city. Next slide. This is the breakdown of the mediations by site. And I want to pause here because I'm sure that there will be some questions specific to this particular slide. I'm sure that eyes are drawn to the lowest number, right? I think we inherently look at the lowest number. And what we see here is that the Woodbourne-McCabe site has 62 mediations. I'm intentionally not saying the word only because Woodbourne-McCabe just went 365 days without a homicide in their post, even with 2 staff members for an 8-month period of time. So we've just fully staffed up this site. And so that 62 number is representative of 2 folks when in most cases we've got 4 folks in each site doing violence interruption. The other thing that I think is worth sharing here, because we get asked this a lot, is what do we mean when we say mediation? How do we even define a mediation? Through the Cure Violence model, conflict mediation is the process of attempting to resolve a dispute or a conflict And our violence interrupters are doing that in a few ways. They're listening to each of the parties that's involved. They are calming down the situation in the moment, even if it means that they're standing in between someone who is holding a gun and the person that they are pointing it to. They are identifying ways to meet each of the parties' needs in an attempt to make sure that there are no retaliatory actions or a flare-up of what stemmed the conflict to begin with. And then they're working with them to address those interests to make sure that folks are satisfied with the outcome, ultimately driving down numbers of gun violence in our communities. I want to pause here for a moment because one of our sites actually shared a real-life story that I think is worth sharing with the council and with Baltimore at large. Forgive me for reading this directly. After getting a call from a concerned father currently incarcerated in federal prison about his son who had been recently shot and released from the hospital, that he had plans to go back and shoot up the corner, and that he was afraid that if that happened, the cops and those folks who may have been victimized would potentially come to his mother's house looking for the son, Safe Streets violence interrupters went to the grandmother's house, and after talking to her, they let her know that because of the severity of the situation, she needed to relocate and move to another neighborhood until the situation was resolved and it was safe for her to return. The workers waited until she packed her things and she was able to leave the neighborhood safely. The Safe Streets workers also got the grandson's phone number from her and consistently, relentlessly attempted to locate him and talk him down from retaliating. After numerous phone calls and coordinating with other Safe Streets workers across the entire Baltimore Safe Streets program, they were able to get in touch with this gentleman and meet with him and discuss the consequences of retaliating and the dangers he was putting his grandmother in. Safe Streets workers worked in collaboration across zones to get this young man not only not to retaliate and to let it go, but to ultimately protect himself and his family. The grandmother returned home 4 days later. The situation was resolved on both ends with all parties, and there have not been any incidents among these individuals since then. The Safe Streets staff stay in contact with the grandmother regularly and have referred the grandson to victim services supports, job resources, trauma-informed resources through our partnership with our hospital-based responder programs. These are real people's lives and real work that is being done to ensure that we end the disease of gun violence in our neighborhoods. And I thought that it was very important to share that not just with the members of this committee, but with Baltimore as a whole. Next slide, please. So where's the money come from? Very intentionally, I want to debunk the myth, the misinformation that is being shared around the funding sources for Safe Streets site administration. There are no ARPA dollars being allocated to community-based organizations who administer Safe Street sites. In fact, all of the money, just like it did before ARPA funds became available, are coming from state funds and general funds. This pie represents that allocation. Next slide. This slide reiterates the point that the previous slide was attempting to make. It really is through partnerships at the state level that we have been able to diversify CVI funding. With partnership before this administration, quite frankly, with former Delegate Branch, the Tyrone Ray Act was passed. That means that Baltimore gets $3.6 million every single year from the state because of this legislation. The VIP funding is funding that Senator Carter and former Delegate Learman put into play to make sure that we got funding from a state level, and doesn't just account for Safe Streets funding, but really also demonstrates their vision around making sure that we embrace the entirety of what violence intervention programming should look like. And then last but certainly not least, just this last legislative session, my office, ROCA, hospital systems, other partners, partnered with Delegate Smith and Senator Sidnor to get the Medicaid expansion bill passed. What that means is that starting in July of next year, community violence intervention work gets paid for by Medicaid and Medicare. And so it's really important that folks know that we're being thoughtful about how we effectively steward city dollars, how we grow this ecosystem, and how we truly address public safety through the lens of public health. Next slide. You can pass through this one, thank you. There are often questions too about what's MONSE's role and what's the CBO's role, and how do they interplay with the Safe Streets sites. So you'll see in this particular view that you've got a couple of arrows coming from MONSE, one of them pointing directly into a relationship with the CVI provider and another pointing into a relationship with the Safe Streets site. We'll cover that in the next slides. So on this first slide, you're really seeing how we interact with our CVI providers. We're using the state funding and the city funding that I just showed you a couple of slides ago to enter into contracts with them to become operators. We are providing programmatic oversight and support in alignment with the Comprehensive Violence Prevention Plan, and we're also making sure that our community-based partners are adhering to MONSE CVI Standard Operations Manual. It is worth noting that before this administration, there was no standard operations manual. Next slide. The next highlighted arrow really talks about the CBO's role as it relates to their relationship with the site. They're responsible for employing staff, for providing fiscal and administrative oversight, for maintaining facilities and vehicles, and obviously adhering to the ops manual. And then last but certainly not least, on the next slide, MONSE's role with the sites. So our job is to make sure that we're providing direct technical assistance and support to sites, that we're providing centralized training and development opportunities for staff, and in fact, staff members who are sitting just behind me are interacting with sites every day to provide that technical support, supporting folks who are newer in their roles and also supporting folks who've been there for a while as we grow this ecosystem out. Next slide. This is what a typical site looks like. So typical sites have 7 staff members. A site director is overseeing both a site supervisor and a violence prevention coordinator, with the site supervisor overseeing the violence interrupters. It's important to note here that the violence interrupters are, quote unquote, the boots on the ground. They are the ones that are interrupting the violence that's happening in communities. Next slide. I'm gonna talk about the model for a couple of minutes here. So the Safe Streets model, based on the Cure Violence model that came out of Chicago, is an evidence-based public health approach model that's really focused on changing community norms around violence. Safe Streets, when it was incepted here in Baltimore City back in 2007, sat under the umbrella of the Baltimore City Health Department and moved over to the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice back in 2018. The model stipulates that we employ credible messengers. And these messengers are credible for a whole host of reasons. They grew up in these neighborhoods, they live in these neighborhoods, they may have even caused harm in these neighborhoods, and they're looking to make sure that they give back and serve well. They're responsible for the conflict mediation and the violence interruption components of the work, and for referring others to the CVI ecosystem partners that we'll be talking about in a minute. And they're focusing on gun violence. I think that that is something that there's some confusion around too in our communities. They are focusing in on gun violence within very clear geographic boundaries. It's not their job to clear the corners or to do pop-up work. Next slide. We'll talk here about the evaluation that MONSE completed. So the mayor made it very clear once we stood up the office that while we had many things to do and many competing priorities, that one of the first things that he wanted us to do was to do an evaluation of Safe Streets to determine what was working well and where we had opportunities for growth. And this is what drove our decisions around the consolidation of administration, around how our ops manual would be created, the roles and responsibilities for MONC, for CBOs, and for sites. So as we think about the strengths here, already talked about, if you could advance a second, thank you, Stephanie. Public health approach, workforce credibility, and strong community support in the posts where these sites are. Not going to go through all of the growth opportunities, but I do want to talk about three or four of them. So if we think about post size and the geographic limitations, we talk to not just the folks who are Safe Streets employees, but also to community-based partners, to participants, to community organizations, to residents about what they thought was working well and what needed to change. And when we had conversations about post size and geographic limitations, their questions arose like, why does the post end across the street if it's still in the same neighborhood? So those are things that we really had to pay a lot of attention to. We also heard our folks say, we want more training. What happens if we are unable to stop a shooting? Can we get stop the bleed training? Because if we can't stop the shooting, we at least want to save a life. Right? That's just one example of a training request that was made by so many of our workers. And then this last bullet here around program understanding and awareness. What we have learned is that depending on the length of time that a site has been in place, depending on the level of community engagement with a site, that there's confusion around what Safe Streets is supposed to be doing and what it's not. And so all of these takeaways were shared in that CVI report that we put out, and the team has been actively working since then to drive toward these opportunities for growth. Next slide. So this is a breakdown of some of the other pieces of work. You're looking at a stack ranking by site. Want to be really clear in sharing that this stack ranking is not based on an academic evaluation. This stack ranking is based on an evaluation of cultural and operational norms that my team completed. And this stack ranking is one that used a rubric that is also already contained in the CVI report that was released in April to determine how sites ranked. Next slide. So when we think about data collection, because we're also asked often, what are sites tracking? It's worth sharing here with folks what we're tracking. Right now, sites track referrals manually. Referrals include activities like resource flyer distribution, distribution of food and other needs, resource fairs, clinics. Resource fairs could include expungement clinics, job fairs, ID clinics. MONC has, for the first time ever, from an agency perspective, begun using Apricot, a case management system, and we will use that to define referrals in a way that makes each CVI program clear on what's a referral so that we've got consistent data capture. Safe Street staff is also going to be trained on this definition, and we're going to be pushing for more and better engagement with partners, community, and the CVI ecosystem. So what else we'll be able to see is consistency around how we define data. Our referrals are going to be tracked through participant reports, referral forms. They're going to be tracked by type, by status, following the incidents, by the community violence intervention provider. We're going to be tracking how many referrals to which organizations. We're going to be tracking real results, outcomes, and impacts, and all of those are going to be broken down at the Safe Street site level so that we can do both aggregated and disaggregated reporting. Next slide. I mentioned that we also heard from Safe Streets team members that they had a deep interest in training and workforce development. We're going to continue to offer those centralized training and development opportunities for all of our installations. Our agency has also developed a career and development track for all of the Safe Streets employees. We're going to be working diligently with our partners, Catholic Charities and Lifebridge Health, to determine what it makes the most sense to centralize and what we will be decentralizing based on offerings. We're also going to be working to fully activate those tracks over the rest of fiscal year 23. Next slide. And so let's talk about our partners. I think that this picture is really telling. I want to decode it for you here. While we are still actively fostering the ecosystem, what we're demonstrating here is that we have grown from more than just 10 Safe Street sites and some loose relationships. So what you see here in the orange are community violence intervention providers. What you see in the green are medical systems. And the medical systems that you see are the 5 medical systems that make up 8 hospitals that treat the most gun violence in our city. What you see in the blue are service providers and our intensive life coaches, our community outreach folks. What you see in the purple are victim services providers. We are obviously keeping our former operators engaged, and we're really making sure that we're leaning into the strengths that they bring to the table. Next slide. So I'm about to queue up one of our 2 partners that's here with us today. I think it makes sense to keep this slide up so that community members and council members have perspective as each of them come up. You're again looking at a slide that I showed you a couple of slides back. It highlights 4 sites that are going to be transitioning on January 1. We are in the midst of those transition conversations right now. So I'd like to ask Kevin Keegan, who's the director of the Family Services Division of Associated Catholic Charities, to come up next. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Director Jackson. Mr. Chairperson, members of the committee, my name is Kevin Keegan. I am the director of the Family Services Division at Catholic Charities of Baltimore as we enter into our 100th year. Sorry, I'm tall. Of providing services to the most vulnerable citizens here in the city and the state. We began this work in the spring of 2016 when we were selected to be the CBO for the Sandtown site after the tragic events in 2015 in the Sandtown area. For many, many years, we've worked around the issue of violence. We've worked, around homelessness, mental health, behavioral health, substance use issues. But we really, as an agency, made a decision to directly invest ourselves and intentionally work in the area of violence and violence reduction. At this point in time, we are excited to grow our work with the Safe Streets Initiative. We've been engaged by MONSE to grow by 2 additional sites in this coming January, and we are in final discussions right now around staffing structures and such so that we can get that process moving. Over the past 6 years, I believe we've established ourselves as a leader in this initiative, and we look forward to growing this work. Primary role of a CBO, in my estimation, is really to harness the resources that already exist in a community, not for us to come in some sort of savior way, but really to look at who's there. And first and foremost, those that are there are those who are already providing Safe Streets. So in our case, Family Health Centers and YAP, they will be they've actually already been our first phone call. We've already begun meeting with their staff so that we can get to know each other in this process of transition. In fact, in Cherry Hill, some of you may know, we're already deeply engaged in the community. We own Cherry Hill Town Center, and we run the Head Start program over at St. Veronica's right up on the corner. So we are already very, very invested in the area of Cherry Hill. We also expect that the location of that post, the office for the post would come over into the town center. We are very supportive of the direction that Monsi's chosen to take and the mayor to reduce the number of CBOs. I can tell you back at the time when, in the former administration, when the RFP was put out, we encouraged the city to not go large with CBOs, with the number of CBOs. The challenges of inconsistencies across sites is great if you have too many organizations running programs. So we believe that the decision to reduce to 2 providers, to 2 CBOs, is the right course of action. And we will, I believe, be able to increase the level of consistency, increase the fidelity to the model across all sites, and therefore I think continue to see solid results. We're also excited, as one of the largest behavioral health providers in the state. We are including a number of Baltimore City schools and 3 clinics here in Baltimore City on the mental health side. We're excited to be able to bring behavioral health and trauma supports to the Safe Streets initiative, and in the coming year we will begin rolling out a behavioral health and trauma team to support all the staff at all 10 sites of Safe Streets. It's hard to imagine a more stressful job that's done than a Safe Streets worker who, without any gear but their orange shirt and their reputation, is standing there between 2 individuals who intend to hurt each other. And that is, as much as they might try to get through on their toughness, it wears, and it's that trauma that they experience every day also then triggers trauma they've experienced in the past, and we as the CBO need to work with that. We need to provide those supports because we need them to be healthy and ready to work so they can be at their best. So we're looking forward to that in the coming year. Regarding data, we have seen good, solid trends in both of our sites in terms of reduced shootings. If you look at the number of events we have each year and the number of community members that are engaged in those events, it's truly remarkable. When we maybe they're at dismissal from a school, maybe over at Sandtown or down in Brooklyn, I mean, the parents, if you talk to the parents, the level of trust they have for the Safe Streets staff and the belief they have of their support in the community is great, and that sometimes is the best feeling you have. In closing, I really just want to say Catholic Charities continues to be focused on improving the lives of Baltimoreans through violence prevention and countless other strategies, and we truly do look forward to growing this work together, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Is that the end of your presentation?
It is not.
No. Got more? Okay, who's up next?
We have Freedom Jones from the director, who's the director of violence intervention at Lifebridge Health. I think that we also indicated that we have Dr. Daniel Webster from Johns Hopkins here to talk about what his academic evaluation has uncovered, and just a couple of closing points.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Better? Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. I'm really grateful to be here this afternoon. As Director Jackson said, my name is Freedom Jones, and I am the director of the Community Violence Intervention Programs for Lifebridge Health Center for Hope. I've been doing community violence intervention work for many, many years. I'm not even going to give you a date, but it's been a long time. I did work in New York. I've run programs similar to Safe Streets and run Safe Streets in Brooklyn, New York. I moved to Baltimore, and because I didn't know the city and believe in this model and know that it works, and I wanted to stay involved, became the director of a site to learn from the ground up some of the differences from New York to Baltimore, and it was going to college. I'm extremely proud of how we're moving forward with our Safe Streets. Lifebridge Health, one of the largest health systems here in Baltimore, is demonstrating its philosophy, care bravely, in action as it takes on six total Safe Street sites. One of the things I truly believe, based on my experience, that consistency and the ability to have the teams work with with more continuity in terms of oversight is critical to the success of the work. Lifebridge Health has done a community health assessment, needs assessment in its community. And as a result of the assessment, what they recognize is that violence is the top health concern, greater than heart disease, greater than diabetes, greater than cancer for the community. Our plan to integrate our Safe Streets components into the Center for Hope is an opportunity to build a coordinated violence intervention effort. Our hospital responder program teams, our mental health team, our interpersonal violence team at the Center for Hope brings many resources to the guys and the women on the ground. In fact, I've experienced it firsthand. To have a mental health component within the Center for Hope to call when you see something on the street to get support, to have a mental health component to support your staff who continuously takes on trauma and risks their lives is critically important. And I'm really glad. I believe in the concept of ecosystem. Ecosystem is about bringing partners to the table to work collectively to address violence. The Center for Hope has is a micro ecosystem, but we're extremely grateful to be a part of an ecosystem to work with partners to address violence. We are going to be working collectively to address providing case management for guys on the street who want to change their lives. Our Woodbourne McCabe site, which is the site I'm extremely, I love because I started there, and our Belvedere site, collectively, and the Woodbourne McCabe site had 2 staff. I think Director Jackson said they did 60 mediations. I know what those mediations are like. I've been on the streets and know the risk that it takes to mitigate an issue when guns are drawn. And they did 60 of those, which could, and most likely, and we can't say 100%, but most likely would have resulted in more tragedy. So I'm extremely grateful and extremely proud about being able to take on these new sites. The Woodbourne McCabe and Belvedere site have a Coochie, which we call our youth voice radio station, where the young people in the catchment area can podcast and address violence in their communities. We're going to expand that model with the other sites. We're extremely grateful to do this work. We truly believe in true partnership. Therefore, we're looking forward to working in partnership, true partnership with Monsi, true partnership with the communities to continue to do this work. If you have questions.
Thank you.
I know that Dr. Webster is en route. I'm happy to leave it open for public testimony for him, but know that it is and has been my and the mayor's full intention from the beginning to make sure that we have regular external academic evaluations of not just the Safe Streets program, but of every single program. In fact, Dr. Webster and I started talking about he and his team completing an evaluation of the Safe Streets program back in March of 2021. So 2 months after I started, he was one of my very first calls. So that evaluation has wrapped up. It ended on 9/30, and he looked all the way back to the inception of the program through September 30th, and his findings are going to be public. We expect them to be published in the beginning of 2023. And when he comes in, sir, I'd obviously defer to you around public testimony, or if you all would want to hear from him as he arrives. Next slide. We'll advance past this slide as well. Thank you. We'll jump right into timeline so that we can wrap up, sir, and address any questions that you or members might have. So as we think about what's next, it's probably most important to focus here on where we are now. And where we are now is making sure that we are preparing the balance of the sites for their transition. We just wrapped up the Living Classrooms transition of their 2 sites over to Lifebridge Health at the end of September. We are in the process of finalizing nominations for our Community Violence Intervention Advisory Board to current board members, and are looking forward to announcing who those members will be. Conducting a Cities United convening next week, which will bring dozens of mayors from all over the country and other folks into this space to talk about the work that they're doing around community violence intervention and their Safe Streets-like programming. And then you can see here that we're slated to conduct training of our Safe Streets sites around our new case management system starting in November. Next slide. Won't dig deep into this slide, but want you all to know that this timeline is one that was created back in April and is one that we have been able to manage too well. Final slide, please. And so as we think about next steps, we're in the planning stages right now of our school-based violence intervention work, very intentionally announcing those 3 schools next week that we'll be piloting that work in. We have regular meetings with our 2 partners now on strategy to make sure that, to Director Keegan's point and to Director Jones' point, that there's consistency around communications, around training, around strategy. We are wrapping up contracts with our hospital violence intervention programs and other fiscal year CBOs that you saw a few slides back, and continuing to foster the ecosystem. So we have not forgotten about YAP and Bon Secours and Living Classrooms Foundation. Even though they are no longer going to be Safe Street sites, we do consider them effective components of the community violence intervention space, and so we'll be leaning into their strengths. I already mentioned that in late 2022, early 2023, you all can expect to see, as we always transparently share any of our evaluations, the results of the academic evaluation. And then in January of next year, stepping into the school-based pilot for those 3 schools that I mentioned and making sure that the modifications for the transition are in effect. At this time, I'm happy to answer any questions, and obviously happy to invite my partners to answer any questions.
Councilman Conway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Director Jackson, for walking us through all the work that you guys have been doing, I think, to shape up the Safe Streets program. I know we've had our highs and our lows. I really want to get to the essence of maybe 2 questions, which I think are the basis behind why we called the hearing. The first being, it's pretty significant that we are reducing our number of operators from, how many do we have now? Or have we already made that change?
Before this administration, there were 8 sites administering, 8 community-based organizations administering 10 sites. Last year, we did transition 1 out, bringing us down to 7. And as of right now, we've transitioned another out, bringing us down to 6.
I see.
By January, we will have 2.
Great. So we are moving, the plan is to move from 7 operators to 2 operators. It's a very significant change. Can you give me a little bit of insight on the logic behind that change, just so we understand as a council? That's a pretty massive change. Just explain to us how you got there and what we're trying to accomplish with it.
Absolutely. And happy to have my partners chime in too. I think you've heard directly already from both of them about the expected benefits that we're going to yield from consolidating what has been decentralized work. I think that the results of Dr. Webster's evaluation too will shed light on why it makes sense to consolidate to a smaller number of sites. The reason why these two, administrators, why it makes sense to use these two administrators in particular is that they make up the vast majority of the components that we're saying need to be a part of the ecosystem. Victim services, life coaching, mental health supports, wraparound supports, employment supports, in addition to outreach, in addition to violence interruption. We know that Mayor Scott has been very intentional about saying that a public health approach to public safety is what we need in order to truly create fluidity within an ecosystem and to make sure that the work is effective as possible. The consolidation of the sites under this type of administration is really going to ensure that consistency and is going to bolster the program's effectiveness. I do want to say, with all of that being said, again, MONSE does plan to continue to work with previous administrators because they are also a part of the ecosystem.
Okay, so as I'm understanding it, the idea is we expect to see efficiencies by reducing the number of operators. And I'll go on a little bit more into, you kind of touched on my second question, but with those efficiencies, have we thought much about what that transition looks like? Some of these operators, as you showed in one of the slides, they were very effective, or at least those sites were very effective. But those are not going to be the folks that we're working with going forward. How have we thought about those changes? How have we thought about that transition? Given that those are long-standing relationships, Bel Air Edison, I think, case in point. Our top site is with the Living Classrooms Foundation. How are we thinking about that transition? It's going over Lifebridge Health. And what are we learning from that transition as we move there?
Thank you for your question. So I want to reiterate a point that I attempted to make before, but might have fallen flat inadvertently. While the consolidation of the sites administration is about making sure that we've got efficiencies, it's also about making sure that we take advantage of as many components of the ecosystem that we're looking to build. These two partners make up hospital violence intervention programming, victim services, mental health, job supports, child abuse, domestic violence, early education programs. And so I can't stress enough the importance of making sure that we're using the capacity that these organizations already have as the groundswell for the work that we're doing. Now, to your question about the relationships with the other administrators, yes, we've had a transition plan in place for many months. In fact, our conversations with those community-based organizations didn't just happen yesterday. We talked to these folks in March about our intentions to make these plans. Now, the reason why those conversations, quite frankly, weren't shared publicly is because we were still working through what that looked like and what the contract negotiations would mean. It would be imprudent of us to be having public conversations around something that had not yet been finalized. I will say that in having those conversations, each of those organizations spoke about wanting to lean into what they considered their areas of expertise. And so, as I mentioned before, actively having conversations with Living Classrooms Foundation and Bon Secours and YAP about how they continue to be a part of this work. Transition planning has been executed extremely well. I think that we learned from every single transition, and given, that unexpected one that I talked about last year, as a learning opportunity, we've got documented transition plans for each site that we're working through with both the transition from and the transition to administrator.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I'm willing to hand off if. Okay. So you mentioned that you began having conversations with the CBOs in March. This is a conversation we've had already, so you can probably predict the question I'm going to ask here. The council didn't find out until it was released to the public in end of September. Why is that? And what can we do to change that? I actually offer that question not just to you. I think this is a broader question, I think, with communication with the administration.
First of all, can't you expand it to full screen?
I don't think so.
Someone needs to be muted.
This is too big a chair for here.
Someone is talking about a chair and they need to be muted. So I offer that to you, Director. I offer that to MOGR as well. I think that communication piece, it's an opportunity missed is my point here. You've got council members who, frankly, we're getting calls every time there's a shooting. We're out there as well in a different capacity than our Safe Streets workers, but certainly could be helpful along the way in providing insight. So what do we miss here, and what can we do to make sure that the council is not left out in the future?
You want to go first? Okay. So a couple of points here. From my perspective, my agency is intentionally extremely transparent with regard to all of the work that we do. And I'm having regular conversations with you, Mr. Chair. We meet every 2 weeks. I have a monthly meeting with several of your fellow council members around work that is happening. And so want to be really clear in saying that I am providing regular updates to folks on the council. With regard to these conversations happening with community-based organizations back in March, again, these were the beginning discussions of what was going to be an evolving ecosystem. There were not defined transition partners just then. It was, we don't want you to feel blindsided when this comes down the pipe. Let's have a conversation about what makes the most sense. Let's have a conversation about the findings that came out of the Giffords report that was produced nationally, that Baltimore City was included in around community violence intervention. Let's talk about what we found out about your particular site and about how we're going to most effectively tamp down violence in our communities through this model. In addition to that, I would offer that the timing with which we shared news with members of the council aligns with timing for other announcements that this agency and other agencies have made. That I very intentionally made phone calls to peers of yours on the council.
Director,
that there are. I'm sorry.
If it's okay, I think my point here is, I think we're going for a comprehensive, we're going for an inclusive model here, and I think that's been your goal all along the way, and I agree with that, 1,000%.
Okay.
I don't think that can happen without the engagement of the council. I just don't think that doesn't really truly represent, we are the legislative arm of the city government.
I don't disagree with that at all. And a couple of points that I'll make here and then turn it over to Nina is that there's no formalized process between the administration and the council for when the council gets briefed. And so it is often left up to every agency to determine what the council gets briefed on and what the council doesn't get briefed on. Again, given my personal belief around transparency, the meetings that you and I had, given that you own the Public Safety Committee, were opportunities for us to do that, and in fact, have done that in the past, specifically around the briefer that we provided to the council president on the Victim Services Report. I intentionally used the meeting with you to say, hey, we might want to do some briefings here. What are your thoughts, sir? You encouraged that we did a briefing with the council president on the Victim Services Report. I recall that because you were heading out on vacation. What I will say here for this is that—
Director, we didn't have a conversation about this before it was released to the media.
I'm sorry?
We did not have a conversation about this. This
You're
particular
right. I
issue.
was giving an example of a case where you and I had had a previous conversation. I talked about the victim services
I think,
piece. So I'll come back to the Safe Streets piece.
What I would like to figure out is what we can do to make sure this doesn't happen again. That's all.
I agree. And I believe that my office has put a protocol in place to make sure that it doesn't happen from our perspective. Happy to turn it over to Nina, and would appreciate an opportunity to finish just a closing thought. The Monday before the presser or the press release went out for this is a Monday that you and I were scheduled to meet, in which I would have had a conversation with you to ask the very same question that I asked around the victim services briefing for the team. Unfortunately, you were unable to make that meeting, and my office didn't know that, and so we left the call. So I want to make sure that we're being
Director, that's a 15-minute meeting that we have just to touch base.
we used that same 15-minute meeting in the past, sir, to account for the victim services briefing.
40 minutes to go through this presentation. Now, you didn't necessarily need to give that to me, but we need to be honest here. There were definitely opportunities, an email, a text. You got my phone number. We don't need to pretend that we missed the opportunity here. That's all.
Councilman, thank you so much for your feedback. I want to say that we appreciate receiving that feedback, and we are always looking to find ways to better engage the council on all of our announcements and initiatives.
Thank you. Mr. Chair.
So just to close that out, I know that it was mentioned that there's a protocol around that. Is there, that new protocol, at what point does the council get briefed on future changes like this? Before the media gets it or after the media gets it? What is the new protocol?
Chief?
Hi, I'm Stephanie Mavronis. I'm the Chief of Staff for the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement. MINSE's putting in place our own protocol to make sure the council stays briefed. We want to make sure the council has advance notice on major announcements in the format of a briefing, and that the council will get advance notice of press releases, because we know that when we put out an announcement, you're inevitably going to get a call from your constituents, and it's important that you have that information. We also want to make sure we're giving more tailored briefings specific to initiatives that may be happening in each one of your districts. And so I believe in the past 2 weeks alone, we've probably touched almost everyone on the council. We have some meetings I know coming up with members we weren't able to meet with yet. And so that's something we're committed to doing moving forward. The last thing I'll say here, just to underscore a point the director made, is that we work very closely with the Mayor's Office of Government Relations around protocol, and I think what we've learned from this situation is that we want to make sure we're even more proactive. You have my commitment for that and my team's commitment, and we will always make ourselves available to meet. We know it's going to take all of us to work together when it comes to this strategy. So thank you for the chance to speak on that.
So just to answer the question, so I would just want to know, moving forward, so that we can expect it. So are you saying that before announcements are made, you will communicate that to the council and give us an opportunity to ask questions prior to it being released so that we have the information before our constituents?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, so my first question on the budget slide, it said $3 million was coming from the state, $2 million from the city, and then on the following slide, it said there was another $3.6 million that is in state law. So what is the total budget for the Safe Streets program?
The total budget is what you see on the pie chart. While $3.6 million is allocated legislatively at the state level every year, Governor Hogan's administration only granted us $300,000 this year. We are working with members of our state delegation to determine why the gap exists.
So by state law, the Safe Streets is supposed to be getting $3.6 million.
From the state, yes.
Is that's above this GO-CAP money, or
That is the GO-CAP money.
that is the GO-CAP money? So they shorted us $600,000.
Yes.
Gotcha. And so, is there something that we can do to help make sure that the state law is being followed, or?
As I mentioned, we've engaged members of the state delegation who are engaging parties at the state level on our behalf.
Gotcha. And so when did this law take place? When did it start?
So the $3.6 million allocation that you see there that speaks to the Tyrone Ray Act has a direct correlation to the homicide of former Delegate Chanel Branch's son, and former Delegate Talmadge Branch put that on the books back in, I believe, 2017, 2018 maybe.
And so has the state honored that legislation every year except for this year, or is this going back?
Yes.
It has. So this is the first year there's a shortage.
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you for that clarity. And can you also just talk, the topic of the hearing was about these changes and the two entities that are, that you guys selected. Can you just elaborate on specifically like how that programming works? Is the city financially paying these two entities to run it? Are they, how does that financial relationship work? Are they being paid to run these programs, or if you can just elaborate on that piece?
So I would offer that, as both of these partners mentioned, they have a deep level of dedication to Baltimore City, and have demonstrated that over many years of engagement, not only with Safe Streets, but through other programming that they are doing. The allocation of funds that you saw in that pie chart makes up the total amount of funding for Safe Streets that is ultimately making its way to Safe Streets administrators. What those funds can be spent on are very strict. We have a template that not only these administrators, but every single vendor that we contract with has to abide to, and that is something that's new under this administration as well. So in addition to making sure that they're submitting budgets to account for operational overhead, there is a budget line that accounts for indirect cost that is at the typical rate for city contracts. And so nothing above and beyond that indirect cost gets routed to these administrators and hasn't in the past.
Gotcha. So these two entities, which they're both great institution entities in the city, they're both using their own overhead and budget to cover sort of their role, but that the city is covering the cost that they incur directly as it relates to the program. Does that make sense?
I'm going to ask you to clarify the question a bit more.
So both the entities are both great entities. They, I'm sure, are putting in a lot of man hours internally to see that these programs are successful. So all of that, all the man hours that they're putting in, that they're absorbing those costs, and the city, this $5 million, is simply just reimbursing all the direct costs that they have related to the program, such as staffing, and
I'm happy for you to jump in. Just want to start here. I would say prior to this administration, I do believe that was the case, as you heard Director Keegan speak to, and I'm not sure if Director Jones mentioned it or not. We are actively having conversations about what any additional staffing costs associated with the work would take to make sure that administration is effective as we think about reporting overhead, auditing overhead, financial management, operational management, but none of those contracts have been finalized as of yet.
Gotcha. So is the entire budget and all the line items, all that's reflective in the Muncie budget and the budget books, is that correct?
Yes, and in that pie chart.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. Any questions? Council Vice President. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I just want to make a statement in reference to just ways to contact council members, and just to remind you that we are all individual legislators that represent 14 councilmatic districts, and we all have a lot of work to do. We're not an agency, and we have certain rules and regulations that we have to abide by as far as meeting in group. We can't, a certain number of people only can meet together in groups. So it has always been a process where each office is contacted individually, and you have to have that communication and dialogue individually. I mean, that's what the mayor's administration and agencies have to do. Every agency has to contact us individually because we are our own separate offices. When we come here, we're together as a group, and as we're doing now, communicating through basically information that's set up. That is a process that's being set up. So I just wanted to just add that piece. So, you know, I was very much involved in Safe Streets because the Park Heights Renaissance was one of the first to really start that Safe Streets, and have been supportive of them and following them, and also watching through this transition. I know, I know Lifebridge is going to do a very good job because they were also involved early on when it was just the Park Heights Safe Streets. And then they took on Belvedere. And so I could go on with a number of things, but two important questions, I guess, or comments for me. Park Heights also is kind of important because it's going through a big revitalization and redevelopment. Physical projects now are starting to happen. Senior buildings through Chi and a footprint that it's just a strong footprint, and still want to make sure that those partnerships are still being developed, meetings are still being developed. Just because they're not now the overseers of the Safe Streets, there still needs to be that strong connection. Is the footprint the same? And that could go for for all of the organizations. Is it all now the entire Park Heights, as an example? You know, I think it's important that we really know the boundaries the exact boundaries of every Safe Streets. I think it's important that I need to know how the Center of Hope is going to be involved. It's just some of those disconnects, I need clarity about, and hoping that, you know, all of that continues. And I do want to end by saying, I've witnessed most recently some of your work and partnership through the terrible incident, the drive-by that kind of happened on Shirley and Park Heights with the 7 being shot. And your office right away partnered with Renaissance, the community. It was so much outreach, and you really showed it. Made phone calls to me personally to make sure that certain things were taken care of on the city's behalf and so on. So really appreciate that, and that's the kind of stuff that really needs to be added and continue to help our residents that are in these communities. Your comment.
Thank you, ma'am. I'm going to try to remember everything. So I will say that through this process, I have learned that I need to have conversations with individual council members. And to the extent that any harm was caused, I am deeply rooted enough to offer apologies. I made some assumptions that chairs of committees were primary points of contacts and would disseminate information as appropriate, but having subsequent conversations with other members of this body, I have learned that I need to have individual conversations, and so you have my commitment that we will be doing that.
Excuse me.
With regard to...
I want to be crystal clear here. We never had a conversation about this, ever.
I did not say that we had a conversation
I also
about
want to be
this,
clear
sir.
here. The indication that I took a vacation in July,
That's not what I said.
and that was the barrier for us to have a conversation about this change. It's not true.
That's not what I said, sir. The vacation that I was referencing revolved
I only
around
had
a
one vacation last year.
The time that I was referencing, sir, is the time that you and I'm happy to pull up my calendar and actually pinpoint it, was the meeting in which we discussed the victim services assessment. You'd spoken about Lydia Watts from Roar coming to your office to visit. We had a meeting in which I asked you whether or not it made sense for us to give a briefing to anyone on the council. You strongly encouraged us to brief.
On this?
I'm talking about the victim services assessment. That's the one that I was referencing.
This is not about the victim services assessment.
Sir, if I could finish my point, because I've been really intentional about making sure that I respect you and not talk over you.
I just have to say it's not respectful if you're spreading information that has absolutely nothing to do with this hearing and is also not true.
So contextually, what I was attempting to share is that we'd had previous conversations about when briefings to other council members would be appropriate or not. That's why it's relevant to this one, that we were using our meetings every other week to have conversations about what was coming down the pipeline and what recommendations you had about whether or not we should be having other conversations with folks. So the context of the victim services assessment that resulted in us taking your recommendation to brief the council president is what I was providing for this situation. I did not indicate that you and I had talked about safe streets. In fact, what I said was, the meeting that we were supposed to have on the Monday, before the presser went out on Friday, a representative from Moger and I were sitting on that call, and you did not attend that meeting, to which your response was, I probably should have followed up with some emails, and I need to be honest
I never said
here.
any of that, for the record.
You just said it in this meeting, sir.
I never said that. I never said I should have followed up with any. The indication that a change, a significant change that you guys plan to make in March was not communicated to the council until we saw a press release comes out. That's the problem. Nothing else is relevant here. You have plenty of months to figure that out. And
Thank you, sir.
And I want to be clear. I'm not saying this is only an issue with you. And that was why my question was phrased the way that it was. I think we need to have a system that works. But
I agree.
I don't appreciate muddying the water and bringing up vacation and in July and like, what does that have to do with any of this?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Ma'am, back to your question. With regard to our engagement with Park Heights, Executive Director Jiggets and I have been in constant conversation and having conversations with her about the transition. She'd articulated that given the focus around community and economic development that that agency is responsible for, that she wanted to make sure that the mayor's office continued to partner on that front. And obviously, Mayor Scott and his administration does. In fact, I believe Director Jiggets and I have some time scheduled for the coming weeks. To your other point about making sure that we continue to be engaged in providing you all with updates and being connected on the ground. That's Monty's mission and will continue to be Monty's mission as long as I'm its director. Thank you.
Thank you. And just my second question.
All right, go ahead.
Are the employees city employees, or are they employees of the entities?
They are employees of the entities.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank you. You know, we're gonna recess this hearing. We're gonna continue it at a later date. You know, we have a topic at hand that is to be discussed, and clearly we have gone completely off topic. And in the interest of everybody's time here, we're going to end this hearing. We're going to recess it, and we will continue it at a later time and move on to the next hearing. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next up, Council Bill 22-0121R, informational hearing 2022 primary election irregularities for the purpose of inviting the Director, Baltimore City Board of Elections, and the Director of the State Board of Elections to come before the council to detail the cause of voter irregularities during the 2022 primary election, potential impacts these irregularities had on election results, and the solutions to ensure that these errors do not happen again. I would like to thank Councilwoman Ramos for bringing forth this resolution and ask her to make opening remarks, and we will turn it over to the Board of Elections. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really appreciate the opportunity to present this. And while Director Jones and his staff get settled, I'll just take a second on my remarks. Mr. Chair and committee, thanks so much for the opportunity to do this. This is an issue in terms of the addressing elections irregularities. Many constituents called me and contacted me during the 2 weeks leading up to the election and then on the day of. Some of the irregularities are included in the resolution, but I will list them here based on the complaints that we received. Some voters in one particular area during just this primary election, 2022, that's what we are going to talk about today, received the correct mail-in ballot when they received it, and then only to be told it was the incorrect ballot, and then they got a second ballot which was incorrect, and then they ended up getting a third ballot which was correct. Several voters received new voter cards that were incorrect information on them, which confused them as to which polling place they needed to attend, they should go to for voting. Some voters were provided an incorrect ballot at the polls and had to use a provisional ballot. Other voters received no sample ballot or an incorrect sample ballot. Certain voters who received an incorrect mail-in ballot went to the polling places to vote, causing the voter to have to vote by a provisional ballot because the system had indicated the voter had already received a ballot. Several voters reported being turned away at the polling place due to errors in the poll books, and first-time poll judges ended up being promoted to chief judges on election day with no training at being a chief judge. This was a result of the shortage of election judges. The shortage of election judges and lack of training was one of the issues around the missing flash drives as well. I had emails from constituents talking about who were judges, talking about the missing technicians at the end of the day to break down all of the information and bring it to the Board of Elections. They also had issues with, who was supposed to deliver things to the Board of Elections, et cetera, et cetera. So in preparing for this hearing, I was able to have great conversations with the Board of Elections, both at the state and the city level. I have a letter from the state board that when the chair seems it's appropriate, I can read into the record, and also have copies here for committee, and then also have a letter from the City Board of Elections. This is an extremely important topic because voting and making sure that it is easy to vote is the most important thing we can do to continue to have, to preserve our democracy. And when people are frustrated with voting, then it becomes an issue. So, Director Jones, I really appreciate that you're here. I know you and your staff are extremely busy right now getting ready for the elections. And so, if you want to talk about the items that you had talked about in your letter, that would be great. And then when the chair seems appropriate, I can read the state's letter, and then we will, take questions. I have some questions, and I know my colleagues have some questions as well. And you want to introduce who's with you today, that would be great.
All right, thank you very much. And I want to thank you, Mr. Jones, for coming before the council, and I want to thank you and your team for the great work that you guys do. You have one of the most responsive agencies in this city. Whenever people call on you, you guys always get us an answer, whether it's the one we're looking for or not. That's a different story, but at least we always feel that you are responsive, and I want to just thank you and your team for that. I know you got a very difficult and stressful job, especially around this time of year. So thank you for making the time to come before us, and happy to hear from you. So you could either, you have two options. You could either come up to the mic, or you can just take the mic. If you want to stay seated, you can just take the mic and use it sitting down. These hearings are televised, and so you got to talk into the mic, otherwise people won't hear you.
Very good. Good afternoon, Council Chair, Council members. It's good to be here to talk about this great election process that we have in the state of Maryland as well as Baltimore City. I want to thank you for an opportunity to come, and if you do have any questions, I'll be more than happy to address those questions. One of the things in the amount of years that I've done the election process, it is not a perfect system, and that's in various ways. Every 10 years there's redistricting that occurs around the state, and Baltimore City was not the only jurisdiction that had issues with redistricting. We normally have 2 to 3 months to do it. We had 2.5 weeks to do it. It's a lot of involvement in maps, trying to make sure the right streets are covered within that area of the redistricting. And of course, out of that redistricting, as I indicated, only 1% of the folk were in the wrong place. No one should be in the wrong area. The individuals that supposedly did not receive a sample ballot would not have received a sample ballot because they were not on the automatic mail-in ballot. You have to request a mail-in ballot, then you would get a sample ballot. So that individual was not knowledgeable about the process. The staff over there do a great job in trying to do this tremendous job dealing with almost 600,000 registered voters. There are vendors that are used for this process. U.S. Post Office, a lot of cases, people say, well, I didn't get a ballot, I didn't get this. We still have 2020 ballots being mailed out by the post office. So we rely on a lot of vendors to do part of what we do. So I just want to say we are looking forward to the general election. Those things, issues that come up during any election period or process, we focus on those issues and try to correct all of those issues to make it work better. And that's what we intend to do again. One of the major problems, again, we heard the discussion about election judges. Election judges have been hard to recruit ever since the pandemic. Right now, I went on air several days ago, did press release to all of the media saying Baltimore City right now is about 1,000 judges short. We cannot control a lot of times how we run the election. If we could, we would have probably done a lot of vote centers where we could cover all of the polling places. So we are still hard at work trying to recruit judges. We are still training judges. I think yesterday we had 60 scheduled to come to training and 10 came. So we do the very best that we can with what we have in our hand to work with. And we will continue to do that and work with what we have to make this process better. So I'll entertain any question. I'm in the process tomorrow. We start canvassing, and I need to be in my office working to make this better.
Thank you very much. Any questions?
Mr. Chair, I just
Ramos?
wanted to say, first, thank you both for being here. I know, again, it's very busy, and part of the work that we wanted to do today was to also see how we as the council can be helpful to you. Obviously, helping to recruit judges is something that we can certainly do. Put it in our newsletters, get it on social. It's extremely important. And let me just say that the residents who were new to being judges that were in my district, most of them had great experience. You know, it's great to see your neighbors coming in, right, and voting. It's wonderful. I also got a report recently from someone who's been a judge for a very long time that the recent training was excellent. And so I want to appreciate that as well, that I think it's been, I've been hearing that it's been improved a lot. So thank you for that. The State Board of Elections in its letter talks about the fact that some of the irregularities that had to do with the mail-in ballots and who had what ballot occurred because of redistricting was so short of a time frame, and that the state board, and I want folks to realize this, the state board actually does an audit after redistricting happens, so that to make sure all the addresses were okay. Well, they didn't have time to do that audit, and so the audit was performed while the ballots were going out. The state board highly recommends that when we do our own redistricting, which has to happen before the next election for the city council, that we do it, and the letter is very clear, by the summertime, to be able to address any issues that come up and have enough time to do the audit. Director, can you talk a little bit about, if you can, how that audit process works? I think this is the first time that the state board did the audit, so it was in terms of timing and the partners and who had to be there. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, pretty much the audit that's done on that state level basically takes the information that we send to them, and they, through GIS systems, they are able to pull out streets that stand out that are not in the right districts or precincts, and they are able to single it out. But as you indicated, time that was done, things were already in motion.
And generally, do you believe that the state board's recommendation of the summertime is a reasonable time, or is it too much time? I mean,
no, I think in my letter I indicated, in order to make sure that we are prepared for the council election in '24, that we need to get the data in a timely manner so that we can have time to do what we do, and most of it is done by hand. It would be nice, a lot of the other jurisdictions within their jurisdiction, the GIS department works with the Board of Elections to do that. We don't have that.
so you don't work with planning, because planning does our GIS? No. Okay. So that can be certainly an issue. And it's my understanding that the errors that I pointed out were really around the areas where there were boundaries changes.
Yes, in the middle of a street.
Yeah, in my case, this happened between 40th and 41st District, right. And there was actually no change in the district, in the redistricting at all. It's just that the addresses got mixed up. Same with one boundary between the 43rd and the 45th that was a redistricted boundary. And so that caused a lot of confusion as well. And I believe other delegates, in this particular case with the 40th and 41st, we were able to work with Delegate Rosenberg to get the message out about who needed to do what. So in the coming election in the November, all of that's corrected. Everybody's got the right registration card, and the poll books will be correct. And so when they go to the polling place, everything should be set.
Everything should be in order.
Ms. Goldman, did you want to add anything else? Okay.
I do want to say one or two other things while I'm here.
Please do.
One of the problems we've had since 16 years since I've been director, Baltimore City Board of Elections has asked for a decent office and warehouse. I'm in a 1930 built building for our warehouse. Just about falling apart, no room. And we've been asking for years for a new location to combine our office with the warehouse so that we can work together in one building. I have 11 vacancies at my office, and I don't have a desk to put them at. So these are some of the things that I've been asking for, and hopefully we can get that done. That's a major part of our problem, and not having the adequate space, being able to cross-use staff without going to the warehouse, coming downtown, and running around town. One of the other major issues we've had, we may not have had an election. Our bills weren't paid. People had threatened to come and take our election equipment. We have needs now for equipment and supplies that we are not able to get. And I think that's unacceptable.
And this is because of the problems we're having with Workday right now?
I believe it is, yes. So canvassing starts tomorrow at the warehouse. You're more than welcome to join us at 10 a.m. to start the canvassing, which will continue until the election is certified. The memory sticks, I know, was an issue at the last election. Not uncommon, but should not happen. They are given instructions on what to do with the memory sticks, that they are to be brought downtown. A lot of times we find them in a bag, supply bag, other than where they need to be. Again, this year we've gone back doing overtime with the police department to have them to pick them up. And that way they will stay at that polling place until they receive them and bring them back, so that we can have 100% on election night. When people say something is missing, a memory stick is missing, in most cases is not missing, we just have to find it in the supplies. Could be left in the scanner where some of them were left. Immediately the next morning, we sent out staff to those precincts and locate those memory sticks. If there's any doubt about them being compromised, we rerun the ballots so that there is no confusion or any doubt about the memory stick. So I know on election night everybody looks for 100%. I want to get to 100%. But at least by morning, we have those memory sticks, and if not, we rerun the ballots. So I appreciate all that you do and helping with this process, and look forward to a great election. Thank you.
Director, what deputy mayor does the Board of Elections work with in the city? Is there, like, who's your point of contact in the administration?
Yeah.
So you guys go directly to the city administrator? So, I mean, first of all, I'm sorry to hear the conditions that you guys are working under. I mean, your employees work extremely hard, and I don't think people realize what goes into running an election, especially with the mere fact that the workforce, out there at the polling locations are all temporary. Imagine trying to get thousands of temporary people to all do exactly what you need them to do, and then everybody wants a Monday morning quarterback and criticize it the next morning. And so, I understand the complexity in which you guys operate under. It's completely unacceptable, and the first time I'm hearing this, that you have site constraints within your offices, and that's something that I'd be more than happy to assist you guys with, and as I'm sure my colleagues here would as well. So if perhaps maybe you can put that together for us, specifically what those constraints are, the size of what the warehouse would need to be. I'm happy to join in with any of my colleagues that are interested in joining to facilitate a meeting with DGS, the administration, and also the budget chairman to kind of just come together and figure out what it is that you need, as well as how the city can deliver that, because there's no reason that you guys should not have enough desks and office space and rooms to work. I mean, I see, depending on what time of year the election is, the warehouse condition is, it's deplorable, and Your employees deserve better than that, and we should have a structure on how this works, and you should not have to be, moving things back and forth. You should have your offices set and your infrastructure there, and so we're happy to work with you on that. And so if you put that together and want to send it over to me, I'm happy to facilitate that meeting.
November 8th, but.
Yeah, no rush. I know you got a lot short term, but I'm just saying long term. We're happy to assist you with that.
Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. Does anybody else have any other questions?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one quick question. I know we go way back, Armistead. I know one of the things you guys used to work very closely with the mayor's office on was Election Day and making sure that all the polling locations open on time. Is that an operation that's still active?
Yes,
Okay, that's all. Thank you.
thank you.
Councilwoman Ramos?
Thank you. So you had mentioned that, I have two questions, that you work with BPD to make sure that, is it to make sure that the chief judge gets safely to the Board of Elections at the end of the day, or what is their role in?
So normally what happens, the election judges are responsible to bring, between the technician and election judges, to bring the memory sticks down and to the board downtown. So not the last election, but the year before, several times we had police department on overtime, we pay the bill for officers to go to at least 5 to 6 precincts, and they pick the memory sticks up and they bring them directly to the building, to our office, so that they can be scanned into our system immediately. So we found that going back to that may be the answer, so that we don't have the problem we had in the primary by having the judges do it and some of them forgetting them or closing them up in the scanner, those kind of issues, or putting them in the wrong place. There's a portfolio that they're supposed to put them in, and of course these folk have worked 14 hours and they're ready to go. So to ensure that we have that information in hand in a timely manner, we went back and changed the procedure to try to make it better.
And then the technicians that are supposed to be, is it a technician per polling place, or is it a technician that comes at the end of the day for?
Well, technicians are supposed to be in every polling place. Again, just like the election judges. At one time, we had over 300 technicians. We don't have that now because the pandemic, people are not working. So in some cases, we have now like 196 locations. We used to have 396 precincts. In some cases, we've consolidated to try to bring down the number of staff that's needed. So that applies to the technicians as well as the election judges to make this thing work.
And the decision to go from vote centers to back to the regular polling places, that was a state decision, correct? Or was that?
Yes.
Yeah, because we've heard various people say maybe going back to the voting centers makes sense, but I also understand it, it's helpful.
Well, it does make sense because that's less folk we need. I think when we did it within the pandemic, I think we had 38 sites. I think it was close to 30-some sites. And doing that, of course, we were able to staff them. But now back to 196 locations, it makes it difficult putting 10 and 12 people in them.
Well, and more people are voting by mail, more than ever before, and that's probably going to be an increasing trend as well. So not as many people are actually going to the polling places. So your partner, I'm sorry, that was 2.
Director, do any of the agencies provide employees for you on these days that you need, such as DGS, or any of the other agencies, or like IT? Are they providing the assistance, like assigning people within every single agency to help you guys? Does that happen?
Well, yeah, Abby does contact folk, and from the beginning, when we came up with the technician position, we did send out an email directly to city employees that worked in technology, because we felt at that time with the new equipment, I think we overgauged the technical part of the equipment, and we sort of required that people had certain skills in technology really, which after a couple of elections, we found out really it was not that high a priority. But yeah, we reach out and put the email out so that we can get folk to be technicians, judges, whatever we need.
Okay, I mean, because the city, you know, the city's got 10,000 employees, and if you guys need people just for one day here, one day there, I mean, the agencies should be able to break off assistants and have somebody assigned to doing different roles that you need done. And so, again, if that's something that you're interested in, please just include that in your proposal to us. Councilman Ramos, you got any more questions?
I have a question for the mayor's office. I don't know when you want to.
Go ahead.
Okay, okay. I think we've discussed this. I'm curious what, when the mayor's office does plan on having our redistricting map, because that is certainly a factor in making sure that our elections are, going to be smoothly run.
Thank you, Councilmember. So Nina Themlis, Mayor's Office of Government Relations. We've been engaging with the relevant agencies across the city to work on developing those maps. We're in the early stages, but we've also had conversations with the City Board of Elections and the State Board of Elections on a requested timeline, but we're looking to, at the very least, meet the chartered requirement for those maps.
It is very clear in the state's letter that the charter requirement is going to be completely and totally inadequate, right? The charter requirement says February of the, before the election, and that would only give the Board of Elections less than 3 months to make this happen. The state board has specifically said, and so did the city board, that we need to do this, by the summertime.
Thank you. Yes, we're going to be working as quickly as possible to get those maps to the council.
By the summertime. Or close to it, anyway. But February, I think, will just be a complete disaster. As I think the state said to me, we wouldn't be able to have an election. So I think that's an important issue. That's it for
That
me.
might be a legislative idea. I mean, you could put in a bill to
Change the charter.
to give more time, even more than the state requires, that the city should lead the charge statewide to give the Board of Elections even more time to do what they got to do.
Except at the state level, the issue was all the lawsuits going on. So that was the issue there. Here, that may or may not happen.
More time can never hurt.
I agree. And that if that's in our charter, then we're just missed the deadline to change it for now, but certainly that's something that we can look into later.
True. Any more questions? That's it. All right, well, Director Jones, thank you again for coming out. Thank you.
Public testimony, we have.
Thank you for your team. Do we have, nobody signed up. Is there anybody here that would like to testify? I can hear somebody, I can't see anybody. Does anybody want to testify? Anybody online, raise your hand.
Mr. Chair, if I could. I'm getting ready to do that.
Excellent. Yeah, absolutely. Director Jones, would you like to introduce your members of your
Yeah,
team?
so
over here?
present, we have 2 of our board members. 3, oh, I didn't see you earlier. Joyce Smith, Tamara Purnell, and Arlene Fisher. And our board attorney, Thomas Chapman, is also here with us.
And do you want to introduce your staff also who's here?
Oh, yeah, Miss Abigail Coleman, my deputy, my right hand. Yes, that's it. And if I may, I would like to be excused. I do have an election.
Yeah, we're wrapping this up. So I just want to thank you again for coming out, and thank you and your team for everything you guys do, and the board members who are here for everything you guys do. And again, we stand by ready to assist you in any way we can, and we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.